Okay, I'd like to call to order the special meeting of the Policy Board of Directors of Monterey Bay Community Power. It's been just about 38, 37. Clerk, please call the roll.
Thank you, Chair. Director Brown. Here. Kaufman Gomez. Termini.
Here.
Parker is currently absent. Delgado. Here. Orozco. Here. Munzer.
Here.
Friend.
Here.
Vice Chair McShane.
Here.
And Chair McPherson.
Here. Okay. I'd like to welcome everybody to our new headquarters at 70 Garden Court, a great facility. We're able to have our community meetings here as well, so this is really great to have you here. I would like to ask if there's any member of the board that consideration of late additions or deletions from the consent or regular agenda in general. Anybody have anything? We're here for some specific purposes. Okay, we'll move on then to item number 3. Public comments for matters not listed on the agenda. Does anyone have, would like to address the board on any items that are not on the agenda? Great. Okay.
Excuse me, Chair. I just want to let everyone know that Ed Smith is here. He's the alternate for Ellen Hoffa.
Okay. Thank you. Welcome, Ed. Good to see you. Seems like only AMBAG days or something. But anyway, now if there's, I don't know if there's, on item number 4, board member disqualifications. Board member may announce any purpose that he or she should not participate in the discussion. Seeing none, we will move to the consent agenda to approve the minutes of the March 7th, 2008 Policy Board of Directors meeting. Anybody have any motion to move?
I'll second that.
Motion to move by Kaufman Gomez, second by Friend. I don't know if, do you need me to repeat who made the motion and second? Okay. Well, if I don't get it right, you just let me know. Fine. Okay, all in favor of approving the minutes?
Aye.
Opposed? So ordered unanimously.
Chair, I'll abstain.
Oh, yes. Mr. Smith abstains. Now to discuss the long-range plan for the Chief Executive Officer position. This week we'd have some discussion on, and if there's any member of the board that would like to just discuss this issue at all, is there any reason to? I think we went through some of this the last meeting. No discussion. I don't think there's a motion that's necessary. So yes, sir, Mr. Friend.
The amendment item is what I'm looking at.
The next item?
That's approve the CEO's approval of employment. This our draft
Number 7.
Oh,
so that's amendment.
That's the next one. Oh, push the button on your mic.
Yeah,
right.
You'll see the green light go on. Okay. Well.
Excuse me. I'll hold that.
Okay.
Chair, what
yes.
item are we on right now?
We're on number 6.
Okay. And what was your question to us?
Is there any discussion of the long-range plan, which we're really going to probably get into more detail about what that could be in item number 7, actually. So, but is there any discussion on that?
Sure. Yeah, I see the item is very different. I see 7 as being how to evaluate the performance of the current CEO.
Mm-hmm.
And I see number 6 as, do we advertise a competitive position or do we not? Or is there some other kind of discussion?
No, there's no.
Mr. Chair, is this, if I understand 6 right, I want to try and understand it, this is more of the succession plan when our CEO inevitably retires out, what our process is going to be. And I think the question attached to that for me is, what kind of notice can we expect?
Okay, Mr. Hibachi has discussed this, that he would say if he was to leave or retire, he would give us at least 6 months' notice.
And the question is that, do we feel that's enough time? Seems like enough time to me. Is that enough time for us to form the committee and to do a broad
the process, like the nationwide process that we went through? Yes, Mr. McShane?
Well, yeah, and I know that there's been a lot of conversation. Some board members have had a chance to engage staff or maybe even Chair McPherson on this item since our last visit. And I know we talked a lot about this. Discussion as to the pay and the term of contract and how it came about. And I just want to say, similarly to what was said last meeting, that now's not the right time to change horses. We need to get this thing launched. We are literally in the middle of going live, not just with our commercial accounts, which are, I think, in the 2 to 3% opt-out, which is decent, but residential goes live in a couple of months. So I know that there's a lot of interest and passion on the part of certain board members when it comes to Mr. Hibashi, the contract, where we go from here. Happy to welcome another discussion at another time. I think the follow-up is to run with it. I think the point that Michael makes is to how much time do we have? Should the contract need to be looked at, or should he leave? And it being 6 months is on the short end, but at least it's enough time. So, I don't think there's action at this time, and we could probably belabor it and have another article written in the weekly if we want. But ultimately, I think we need to stay the course, and if need be, and it will come, I'm sure, sooner than we probably realize as we mature as an organization, talk about the national search and finding the right next step for leadership.
And
His friend.
I agree that somewhere down the road we have to make this discussion, but I want to let you know that
Mr.
the
Chair.
national search for
Is that
for
on?
this level of person, 6 months is definitely not enough time.
Yeah.
Because we're talking about somebody to run the organization. After Tom has got the ship running smoothly, somebody to keep it on course, and it's not going to be an easy. There's not a lot of those people out there in the utility industry. Whether it needs to be in the utility industry, that's a whole nother discussion. But
Okay, I think we should be able to, excuse me, maybe I'll discuss this with Mr. Bashi if the board would like me to say we would like preferably a year's notice, or 9 months anyway. I think that would be
I would think 9 months at a minimum.
9 months a minimum, yeah.
Or
Okay.
or 6 months with an extension if we have to.
Okay.
I don't know,
And if I could, a year sounds pretty comparable to the conversations that we've had previously about our interest in making sure that we have some continuity during the transition. So it would be great to see if we could get to a year.
Okay. Would I think the board would prefer me to talk with him about that, 9
Yes.
months to a year range, not 6 months, okay? Yes, sir? Mr.
Yeah,
Delgado.
I'd like to step through the process that got us today very briefly. Step one was approximately a year ago. We flew the position for 2 weeks because we were in a hurry and we had to get rolling. And we found a candidate that has done an excellent job. And we paid that candidate, incumbent, $330,000, which was a tough pill for a lot of us who aren't used to that size of a salary. And the reason we agreed to that is because we were told it does not include an expensive compensation package, which would be about 30% savings. And we got to get this thing going. And we'll worry about the next round when we get down the road a little bit. So now we're down the road a little bit, and the proposal approved last meeting was not only to continue the $330,000 per year, but add a $30,000 bonus and the expensive compensation package, with no real discussion about, wait a minute, last time we added we took the compensation out to justify the high salary. Now we're increasing the salary and putting the compensation on top of it. And so then we went to a vote, so that vote is done. We were told that we got to get the word interim out of the title. So last meeting, let's approve the incumbent so we get the interim, call him permanent. And then my memory was that the chair, Bruce McPherson, was going to work as best as he could with staff to quickly organize a special meeting, which this is, in order that we could consider the options of where we go from now as far as a national search in the near future, or stay with indeterminate contract that has no end to it that we applied, that we approved last week. So to sort of sweep it under the rug and just move on leaves us with $330,000 a year plus a $30,000 bonus plus an expensive compensation package with no end to the contract,
Yeah.
never having sent it out for a competitive bid. This is the highest paying position in any government agency in Monterey County, and we just kind of let it go.
We've made that vote, and that's really not a point that we can really have a serious, in-depth discussion again at this point. I think our legal advice would be the same. I get your message.
But I thought that was the purpose of the special meeting that you said we were going to have, which because we couldn't do it in closed session, which would have been more comfortable for all of us. But you said we're going to have a special meeting within 2 weeks, and it couldn't happen that quick, but you tried. And so today is the day that we were going to revisit the future of how to advertise or not advertise this position.
Well, I think we're not going to get into that position. This would be a terrible time to switch our leadership and with the people who've been hired in particular. My thought is to have to set, and I've talked with legal counsel on this, and we've gone back and forth, and this is the best approach that we can have from the motions that were made and understood, that we should consider to set the policy and performance goals for the CEO. We're not going to get into the that's not the way that I understood it to come down. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. The motion that was approved at the last meeting, can you hear me? Was to approve the employment agreement as presented and subject to also discussing a long-range plan for the CEO position. So that's why we're meeting at the special meeting in open session.
So discussing the long-range plan to me means, can we go out in 1 year or 6 months with a national search now that we have the interim removed from the title? And of course, the incumbent, it would be his position to lose, most likely. But we might find through competition that we are able to enhance our organization and show the public that we are a public entity going through the normal public process. Back a year ago, we were told that the hiring process would take at least 5 months. And we couldn't do it then, but that we would like to do it in the future. Now is the future.
Yeah. Mr. McShane?
Yeah, just a couple of things. And you know, obviously this is appropriate. This was what was punted for this meeting, whether it's agenda item 6 or 7. Couple of things that are worth throwing out there. When we first got off the ground, I think it was a little longer than 2 weeks. It wasn't much. I mean, it was quick.
I'm holding the minutes. It's 2 weeks.
Okay, it wasn't long. I mean, in anticipation of getting going, even when the organizing was happening a year in advance, the people that had the skills and the wherewithal to run an organization like this, trust me, they knew that Monterey Bay Community Power was coming together. So let's just say the field was assembling to some extent. But be it what it is, I also want to pay tribute to the operations board. This is the board of city managers that we task with making sure that this thing runs. In fact, they meet quite a bit more than we do. And they negotiated. And you better believe I followed up with my city manager to find out exactly what went down. This is what was the product of that, what the market is. And it is a tremendous amount of compensation. It's a different sort of beast than a solid waste authority or a city even. So I would leave it at that. To your enthusiasm to reopen a national search, I think that would weaken our organization with long-term contracts or even just our ability to get started and confidence within our employees. I think it's well within our means to say, in a year's time, we evaluate our CEO. And depending on how that evaluation goes, it's either time to open up that search or not open up that search. I think now is the time, as we are literally ramping up, to show all confidence in our staff and our CEO to get this thing going and focus on the positive and the results and hold our CEO to those results. And when the time's right, in a year, I would say, 2, if you're comfortable with that, depending, we'll have that evaluation, most likely in closed session. And, like the city of Marina or the city of Salinas or the city of Gonzales, we'll know whether our CEO's doing the job or not.
Any other comments from board? Yes.
And it's also based on the JPA, on the language on whether it's closed session or open session on there. But we do need to show that there is the solidarity for such a large organization that has a huge magnitude in the Tri-County area that wasn't thought lightly. It's been a 4 or 5 year process to even get to this point. And to show the public that we're out doing a national search on something before we even fire up all of the switches in this Tri-County region doesn't show that we have a very solid ground. We need to make sure we have a solid foundation when it comes to who we have in the leadership role. And I know that there was a lot of search and research done at the PDAC level of the caliber of management that we needed with the experience that we needed, because I don't see the feasibility of this company, even if he were to step back and somebody from the board or bring in somebody in on the interim, it would make a very shaky organization for the CCA if we were to make that kind of a change. And I'm looking at it as, I don't want a nation search when we already have somebody that we have here and has been fully vetted with the process of establishing this organization.
Okay, and I do think it was unfortunate, the speed of which we had to do it, but I'm really glad we did it, because what has taken place in the legislature since we went through that process, we're glad we're up and running, believe me. We're very fortunate to be where we are, and we can discuss this further, but I don't think this is the right time to do it. Mr. Friend?
I was just going to echo some of the other comments that, I mean, you have to realize we gave a man a good chunk of money, I agree. We gave him a piece of paper, and we now have a corporation that's ready to turn the lights on. We were so lucky that, yes, the industry knew that this was happening. The industry also knew that they were going to be hiring an interim CEO to get it started, and the stars were aligned, and Tom was in the position to jump on that, and we were real lucky that he was, because I'm not sure there's more than half a dozen people in the utility industry that could have just taken a piece of paper and came up with what he's already done. To put out, I'm not disagreeing with that we should go with a nationwide search down the road, but to do it now, it just tells Tom, thank you very much, but get out of the way, we're gonna run it. And we have no idea what we're doing with it. We need to get a year or two, or till Tom's comfortable and everybody's got the ship down the road before we even think about this. When it comes time, I agree with you. We need to do a nationwide search, because there could be people back east that could fill this position that we don't know about. We didn't have the opportunity because of the short timeline. But we were real lucky that there was even 3 people that applied that had those qualifications. I just think it would be a terrible thing to put out the notice now that we're looking for a permanent one.
Yeah. Mr.
We
Smith?
have a permanent one.
So I was not here for participating in the conversation, but I have had some conversations with others and reading through the minutes, and I just have a perspective that to me this looks like an opportunity to have a slightly new twist on a model of how the policy board and how the operations board handles a future negotiation. It could be that there's an opportunity to select it in a different manner, so this board feels like they have a little bit more participation in a future negotiated contract for after that year of service from Tom. So as we move forward, I think there's an opportunity to look at how we coordinate between the two boards. We all serve on a variety of boards, and one of the very large ones is TAMSI, and it has an executive body, and it also has a very large voting membership. So I think that there's some future discussions about how we coordinate and communicate and update what each board is doing, and how it's an opportunity to merge together and select possibly a member from this board and a member from the other operations board to handle these kinds of things, to make sure that we have a fully represented body for this board. I agree, a vote is passed. A vote was on the agenda before. It went a certain way, and that's not what we're here to do today. We're not undoing a vote. That vote is passed, and we have an agreement in a contract relationship. We also now have an opportunity to forge a relationship with our executive director and all the staff that's here to move this forward. And I would encourage everybody that that's where our focus should be in terms of building the relationships, building the solidified organization that serves the community, that has the ratepayers that choose to be a part of this organization, and we advance the cause of lower rates and carbon footprint lowering. So the perspective I have is that we ought to look towards, well, let's see what Tom can do as he leads this organization and focus on our goals and objectives and clearly solidify a relationship with the leadership here. But I look at this as an opportunity to move forward, and I don't want to revisit a vote that's already passed. I think the vote stands, and we'll have an opportunity to recraft the position in a year or 2 years. Tom has already got many years of this experienced work, and I don't think he's going to work another 30 years. I think we'll be making these decisions in a year or two in a transition of a succession planning, and it could be that there will be somebody that's here that Tom has selected, that Tom is participating in a mentorship model, that next internal candidate could be here already. So my thought is, let's work with the organization that we have and get ready to work with the solidifying the goals and objectives of the executive director.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Just for the benefit of the public who was not engaged at the time that we first hired Tom, we just did not find a candidate and throw a pile of money on them. The operations board brought us the going rate for this kind of position, and we fit into that rate. It's not like this was out of the ordinary. This was very much in the ordinary, and it is what this position costs.
Okay. Any other comments? Comments from the public?
Good morning. I'm Christy Markey, Supervisor Parker's Chief of Staff. She apologizes that she's ill today and unable to participate. But if she were here, she would say very much along the lines of what Mayor Delgado said, that this was put on the agenda because at the last meeting there was a lot of dialogue about extending the contract. And there was a time, if you look back in history, what we had been committed to, we had a 2-week advertisement period. We were told that that's all we had time for, and that's fine. The idea was that we would get somebody on as an interim, and then later when we had more time to look at, you know, what we wanted out of a CEO and have the public potentially participate in what we want in a CEO, that we would have a 5-month search. That was in the, excuse me, in the staff reports from the meetings in May and July. So it's documented that that was our plan. And then there was this acknowledgement that we needed to perhaps extend the contract, and the discussion, according to Lou Bauman, was it was going to be a 3-month extension. But then during that discussion, somehow they said, well, let's just take the time out and make it kind of a month to month. And then it came to this body at the last meeting, and it was approved, and now it's sort of become a, well, he's our CEO till he retires. So there's been a sliding kind of down this road without direct intention to do it this way. And I think that because the position's so important, that's disconcerting. And then to have it on the agenda and be told, well, it's on the agenda, but we can't discuss it. We're not trying to undo the vote from last time, but put some perspective on how we got to where we are today. It's unusual for a public agency to hire their highest position with just a 2-week advertisement. So not wanting to reopen the dialogue for his position today, not wanting to go out and post today to do a 5-month search as we were told it would take, but to acknowledge that this is how we got to where we are today, and that we haven't had a process perhaps with the public, you know, given the public interest in this agency and the public the public got this agency going, that we might want to ask the public, what do you want us to look for in a CEO? Have a process with the public where we put together our package for advertisement. You know, what are we looking for in a CEO? None of that has happened. So we're just asking that we still view this as interim, and that, give it a year, I suppose. That's been sort of the discussion. I'm hearing people say, well, let's give it a year and then talk about it. Let's not talk about it today. And that's okay too, as long as there's an understanding that that's where we're going, and not have it be in a year, well, this is our permanent CEO, and what do why are we revisiting that? So just wanting to make agreements about where we're going and stick to it. Thank you.
Good morning, Michael Saint with Citizens Climate Lobby. I'm also very much in support of what she said, and following Mr. Delgado's line of thinking, I wrote down a few things that were recommended by the IRS, specifically for nonprofits, but it could be also for not-for-profit type organizations. The number one thing that they recommend when vetting a CEO is make sure there's an independent body to conduct a comparability review, which I think probably has been done. Could be a subgroup of investors or policy board or operation board members. Also, comparable review of salary and benefits for similar missions, budget size in similar geographical regions, which would be the 3 counties here, and with what they pay their similar leaders, not necessarily CEOs. Also, the important part here legally would be to document who was involved in this process. Also, documentation that the above comparable data was taken into consideration prior to compensation that is being approved. Those are all from the IRS, are somewhat of a legal aspect. And the reason for these 3 things, you want to ensure that the board has approved reasonable and not excessive compensation, basically because it's a fiduciary responsibility of every non-for-profit or non-profit board to be responsible for the compensation that's not crazy. Also, engaging in an annual process of review of compensation and approving compensation and documenting it will protect the nonprofit or not-for-profit as well as the board members themselves. These are from the National Council of Nonprofits, and I also agree with Mr. Delgado's comment on the last meeting that if we set the bar too high, other leaders of organizations as well as CEOs are going to come and ask for the same thing. This is not Major League Baseball or National Football League type compensation process. These came from the National Council of Nonprofits, and then also Simply Wall Street had a compensation rise last year of CEOs of about 12%. So just as a suggestion, I know we added about 40% compensation because of the benefits. You might subtract those benefits out from what Mr. Delgado is presently being paid and give him a 12% raise, I think would be appropriate. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, my name is Jamie Goldstein. I'm a city manager for the city of Capitola, and I participated in the hiring process that we went through more than a year ago to get our interim CEO on board. A couple things I'd just like to bring out and echo some of the comments that were made by board members in the discussion previously. The first is, one detail is that pursuant to the JPA, the CEO is hired by the policy board upon a nomination by the operations board. So there's an interplay, which I think was discussed by some of the board members between the operations board and the policy board. As I'm not the chair of the operations board, but as one of the members, I would be certainly willing to convey to the rest of the board members an interest, but if it comes from this board, in participating in any sort of evaluation process down the road for our CEO. A couple things I think that are fair to point out for the record is that while the recruitment period for the current interim CEO was relatively abridged, it was well advertised. It was a nationwide search. There was the comp studies that we discussed, the previous speaker discussed, were completed evaluations of what comparable salaries existed for positions that were analogous to what we're talking about were evaluated. And there was a vigorous negotiation process that was led by the ops board team that I was a part of. And I just want to assure the board, I've hired more than 7 department heads, 3 CEOs or general managers for outside JPAs. It was actually one of the more robust negotiation processes that we've ever had, I've ever participated in with a chief executive. And the ultimate salary we landed on was well within the range when we looked at the comparables. So moving forward, I would offer sort of as a liaison back to the operations board if the policy board would like input into evaluation processes or goal setting, anything along those lines. And I'm available if there's any questions from the board. Thank you.
Kevin Dayton, representing Clear, Honest Options in Clean Energy. There's no question, looking at the CEO's compensation, that is high, and anybody who's concerned about fiscal responsibility is going to look at those numbers and say, that's a lot of money to pay for a public agency executive. I think, though, putting it in larger context, the first thing you note is, I'm not sure what the number is now. I hear that there are 23 community choice aggregation agencies that are either established or being established or about to be established. The competition is fierce, and you know that some of these agencies that are coming in later are going to be having a lot of obstacles before them that you didn't starting early. And these agencies are going to be trying to poach the best. And to tell you the truth, it appears that there are very few people available out there with significant public utility experience as executives who'd be willing to take on this sort of work. And I think you have to keep in mind, since this is a competitive process, the CEO probably has to be paid a significant amount of money in order to keep him here. It would be a shame if all of a sudden you were out without leadership and the things started falling apart. I also want to bring up, I said at the January 20th workshop that there appear to be two factions developing on the Monterey Bay Community Power Board, one that's cautious and very much focused on keeping the customer rates down, and the other one that's very eager for transformational change. Both of these visions have validity to them. However, there is reality out there that some people are unhappy that Monterey Bay Community Power isn't moving fast enough for them with that transformational change. They want to see more environmental transformation and social justice programs. And the thing about it, that sort of thing is often that costs a lot more. So I think when you saw that first divided vote on a board, 7-4, it really fell along the lines of what is a long-term vision for this agency. I can tell you that the business and ratepayer groups that I'm interacting with want to see competitive rates that are competitive with PG&E. They want to see an organization that's focused on providing clean, renewable power at reasonable rates for customers. That's what their vision is. So keeping that in mind, I encourage you to do your proper evaluations, but keep the course. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Horacio Mezquita, and I'm with San Gerardo Cooperative. Most of the wages in the Salinas Valley for farm workers are very low, and it has nothing to do with this agency, but I just want to support Mr. Delgado and Parker on the opening process of hiring a CEO that maybe you have a good CEO that will do a good job with less payment. So you already voted that he's going to get paid whatever he gets paid. It's fine, but keep the process open so you have an agency that it shows that the process open for the public. Don't close the doors. Keep it open. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Heidi Zamzo with Communities for Sustainable Monterey County. I do appreciate all the comments that have been made, but I hope you have an appreciation for the impact of your decisions to those of us who are the boots on the ground, because this decision the process has made our job a whole lot more difficult to sell this thing, because not everybody is on board. A lot of these people don't have any reason to trust a system that they have not been included in from the get-go. And to them, this may feel a whole lot like, here's to the new boss, same as the old boss, because the tenets of transparency and public process and equity have quite frankly been violated in their view. So I really want to give my thanks to Mayor Delgado, Christy for her comments and some of the other comments that have been made, because it feels like at least someone is listening and at least trying to understand the dilemma of a lot of the people who make up the community in Monterey Bay, community power, and hopefully we'll continue to be engaged in this process. But I really highly encourage you to revisit this down the road. Give us some reason to give them some faith going forward. Thank you.
Okay, is there anyone else that would like to address us on item number 6? Okay, that there's no need for action, I don't think, at this.
I would like to make a motion, because this is a action item as well as a discussion item, and that would be to get the public involved for the next hiring process to begin within 9 months, so that about a year from now, we can put out to a competitive bid for the first time a permanent position. That's my motion.
Well, hey, do I have a second? Okay, it dies for lack of a second.
Then to close out the discussion, I have a couple of comments. Last year, we approved $330,000, no benefits. It's done. This year, we approved $360,000, including the $30,000 bonus, with a $100,000 benefit package, which is a 33% increase short of a year, not even a year. But we had no discussion about how the salary used to be within the market range at $330,000, that it now is still within the market range or not at $460,000. And it's likely the market hasn't increased 33%, but maybe it has, but we didn't have that discussion. We just are doing it, which means that we will be tied for the future. The next time we hire someone, they'll be looking for the same pay. And to say that 2 weeks was a nationwide search, that was for an interim. We all know that if you had a permanent position, you probably would not jump so fast for an interim position as another permanent position. So we've never advertised nationwide or strenuously a permanent position. This, I think, is the largest pay of any CCA, larger than the CCA in Marin, which is the largest CCA. So how our organization would be more complicated than the largest CCA, and why our leader would warrant getting much more pay than the largest CCA, we haven't discussed that, but it should have been part of the due diligence. I think that this will be a stain on our organization, because we are in the get-go and we jump to a $460,000 pay with no discussion about its merits that was involved with the public. And I had an email from Tom Habashi saying that Cal State Monterey Bay was opting out, and that I, being one of the elected board members here in that area, it would be nice if I spoke to them. It was harder for me, because of what we're going through now, to have the faith in this organization to go to bat for it, because at the last meeting, we said no to paying people the market rate for generating surplus solar energy from their roof, because we didn't have enough money. We wanted to save the money. It was like about a $300,000 decision. And then we said yes to this because it was such a small amount of our revenue, it was no big deal. And so to me, we're putting pay for our leader ahead of encouraging people to do the right thing in their personal lives and get on board with sustainability. So I do think that this is, like a woman said in public comment, it's going to affect our reputation. We are an outlier now in the wrong direction. And our vision, if we don't do anything different, is that our long-term vision will just continue the status quo. And I think that's unfortunate. Thank you.
Any other comments?
Yeah, I mean, I just to Mayor Delgado, know that your points are taken. Some of them were even agreed to by board members, by members of the public. They're in the minutes, they're in the press. I think you have everyone's agreement that when we come to a point for hiring a CEO down the line, when Tom's days are done, there will be a national search. It will engage the public. Even a representative of the operations board echoed that. He's ready to help. I know you're very passionate about this. I think we've discussed it for 2 meetings, and it's now more important than ever that we move on. We got a lot of work to do, and we need we need to be unified. We need you, we need Christy, we need the entire team on board. And as I'm sure we all experience with our own respective boards and JPAs, sometimes, you know, you get beat up one day and you dust yourself off, and the next day, well, that vote's behind us and we move forward. We have so much to celebrate. This is a landmark organization and agency that's going to do great work. And, you know, while I think we all have a tough time stomaching the amount of executive compensation on the table, we've been assured it's within market. And certainly as we go back out, the market will, I'm sure, have changed. So I just want to offer that encouragement because we have a lot of work to do. So it's appropriate that this came up. I feel like there was a lot of conversation and comments from the public, but you know, ultimately, item number 7 is where we get to set goals, and there's no better performance measure for whether the organization's headed in the right direction and our executive is doing the job that we hired him to do. So that's all.
Okay, any other comments from the board? And then Ms. Brown from Santa Cruz.
Just to follow up on Vice Chair McShane's comment, I agree that for me, the real issue for the day is to ensure that we have the conversation to make the Community Advisory Council and our board, our respective boards of directors, operations and policy boards, really engage with our staff and our staff leadership to ensure that we're pursuing the goals that we have set forth for this this JPA. And while coming out of the labor movement and community organizing, I have a hard time with CEO executive salaries being, you know, relatively high. I think at this point, what's most important is to work with our CEO to ensure that, and in the conversations I've had with him, I think he's on board with that as well. So I'd like to move forward in that direction to item 7.
Okay, Kaufman Gomez.
Yeah, certainly. We have voted on what the salary and the benefits are for him. I'm ready to move forward in terms of the discussion about the items that we really need to be here focused on, the performance issues. When it comes to the salary and whatnot, maybe it would be beneficial if at one point the board or the public saw what the survey was to evaluate where the wage came from and then move on, because we've already made the decision.
Right.
Water's under the bridge, and let's actually focus on what we're here for this item.
Okay. Any other comments from the board?
I'll just a real quick a caveat. Back when we had our first meeting, I was one of the ones that had concerns over the compensation, and I don't want to relive the compensation piece, but I just want to say that, and this is specifically to some of the comments from the board today, is that I'm the alternate, and Mr. Hoffa sits normally in this seat, and I think he expressed his position, and I can see that in the minutes and the vote, and I share that same concern. At the right time in the future, we can revisit this, and I just feel that this is not the time to open up and change course, but I have confidence in the direction that Tom is going to take the agency, and that does not mean that our core value in terms of appropriate compensation has left us. We know that there are times to make decisions, and there are times to revisit the decision to make it right. So there will be that opportunity in the future. Right now, in the infancy of the organization, I agree, Steve, we've got work to do, and that's where our focus should be. And then we can fix perceived mistakes of this organization as it gets going, and there will be other growing pains, and we won't always do everything right, but we know that we have the focus of trying to improve the Tri-County area with the goals and objectives of this agency. So be patient with us. We're all going to make mistakes, but we're focused on the right things, and I think we have the leadership to do that.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move on. There's no action necessary on that. We'll move on to item number 7, to consider a proposal from the chair to form an ad hoc committee comprised of 2 members each from the policy and operations boards to develop performance goals per the CEO's approved employment contract. And with that in mind, I made some proposals that I think each of the board members received as suggestions, and I would like to just initiate the conversation here with the framework that I think we should consider. And certainly any ideas from the board members or the public are welcome in this discussion. But to develop the performance metrics and goals, and I'm just going to read them from the sheet that I sent to the other members. My proposal is to form an ad hoc committee comprised of 2 members of the policy board and 2 members of the operations board to develop draft performance metrics and goals for the CEO, which should be submitted to the policy board for final consideration and approval as its regular meeting on June 6th. And I have asked a few folks about that, and certainly anybody who would like to participate or be one of those 2 on each of the policy and operations boards. But I had contacted Supervisor Parks and Mr. Ray Friend, a board member on the policy board, and Mr. Mendez, who's chair of the operations board, and Jamie Goldstein, the city manager of Capitola. If they would be interested, they each have said they would be, but that doesn't mean we would have to make that decision. But that's a basic proposal. But some of the recommendations regarding the draft metrics and goals for the ad hoc committee's consideration that I would like to have included. Successfully launch commercial and residential service on schedule March 1st, which has been done with commercial and residential July 1st of this year, with less than, and I have a 2% opt-out rate for both sectors. I think that's pretty strict. I think probably 4 or 5% is reasonable. In looking back at the rest of the other CCAs, but that's obviously we can make these are just suggestions for the ad hoc committee to come up with. Number 2, fully pay back Monterey Bay Community Power's startup loan and debt to Santa Cruz County on or before September 1st of 2018 this year. Maintain a line of credit until the agency has realized its goal of establishing reserves equal to 50% of the annual operational budget. We all know that the costs of power swing pretty dramatically on occasion, and I think that is something we have discussed as a board before, and I think we need to be sustainable, and there's going to be some swings in the market, and that's why I make that recommendation. And this is for just the ad hoc committee to consider. Number 3, maintain a comprehensive community outreach plan that focuses on public education, community partnerships, keeping the website current through monthly updates, and maintaining media relationships. The staff that we have right now has done an excellent job of outreach since our last meeting, and we've gotten very good response, as a matter of fact. Number 4, form a community advisory committee, or CAG, no later than July 1st, 2018. Provide the staff support to assist the the advisory committee, and a couple of the things that they would be in drafting the bylaws, goals, and objectives by September 1st, and drafting initial recommendations regarding complementary programs as part of the new fiscal year budget effective October 1st, 2018. And 5th and final proposal is that other operational metrics and goals as deemed important by the ad hoc committee and consistent with the overall strategic goals of the agency. Number 1, maximize greenhouse gas emission reductions. 2, reduce customer costs, stabilize rates for the future. And 3, invest in local energy programs and projects. That could be a varied series of projects for more low-income individuals in our tri-county area. It could be for school districts. It could be for a lot of automobiles. It could be for a lot of things, and I think it's going to be some pointed discussions when it gets to it. But I think that's something that we should have. Those are some of the recommendations I think should be included in the ad hoc committee's considerations of getting the performance metrics and goals for the new CEO. I would appreciate any input that you might have, any additions or maybe eliminations of what I've suggested, but it's open to the board, and then we'll go to the public. Any comments from the board? Yes, Mr. Delgado.
I note that 3 and 5 don't have any quantitative metrics, but 1, 2, and 4 do. 3 and 5 regard respectively community outreach and goals regarding greenhouse gas reductions, investing in local energy. So those two items, 3 and 5, and 5 has a couple of sub-items, are very important to everyone and the public. So I hope that there is a way to put some metrics there so that we know whether or not 3 and 5 are done excellently, average, or poorly. And then the last thing I want to say would be, in addition, something about public relations in a CEO. Oftentimes, the public relations skills are very important. This does refer to a community outreach plan, but that's different in my mind than how any entity's leader interacts with the public. Some people, Gesundheit, some people are great with public, some people are not so great with public, and I think that part of this job needs to be, above average with the public. So if there was some way that we could evaluate this in every CAO in the future, as far as as her or his public relations ability, public communication, I think that's important, and I don't see it here.
Okay. Any other board member? Yes, Ms. Kaufman-Gomez.
Thank you. I'd like to see a little bit more on the legislative end, because I think that's significant with the CCAs, and we will be looking at making sure that we're inclusive on what that means for this agency. And then the other thing, too, is I'm seeing these as a lot more of the short-term goals, a lot of things that we can accomplish for this year by the end of this year. And I'd like us to see something that's going to give us a little bit more of a timeline, a little bit of a futuristic set of goals, and having the markers, the quantitative analysis markers in them. I think that would be helpful, and perhaps get some comments that might lead to that in the overall picture of what we want in performance.
You're correct. I think that's a good point on the legislative end. I mean, they come after us, and it's we against them. Not the legislature, but some special interests that don't like the way CCAs are moving and how quickly they are. I think we're going to have a real battle, believe me, come May and June in Sacramento this year, as we have in the last 3 years or 4 years, because I've been up there observing it firsthand. But anyway, that's a very good point. And yes, Mr. Friend.
And I want Mr. Delgado to understand, I'm not disagreeing with any of his suggestions. I'm just curious. Both those items, 3 and 5, are fairly subjective. I mean, to put a quantitative note, does that mean is on TV 3 hours out of the 60 hours available, or does that mean has 15 news items written about him, or how do we quantify a subjective like that says, I think he's doing a good job with the media and you don't? That's one of those things that I agree, if we could have a number that he says he met it or didn't meet it, would be really cutthroat, and that's the way it should be. But those two items, other than asking him to prove to the board that he's doing that, or our perception from the public is that they're hearing enough from the CEO that they feel like comfortable with what he's doing. It would just be hard, and I'm not saying it can't be done. I just wonder, how can we do that on just those two areas? The other areas, yeah, you have a drop dead date, he made it or he didn't make it. Very simple, very easy, tough to meet. These are pretty aggressive dates here. And then like Trina was saying, is these are short-term goals. If they're met, we're probably going to have to reevaluate this, because then now we're up and running. We've met those goals. We have our JAG. Now what do we do? What is Tom going to do to keep the ship in the middle of the river? It may be something that we do on a short term and have to have another committee a year from now to say, our goals are not changed, but our metrics on how he's being measured are going to change. We get along further in the process. We learn more about what to expect. We learn from the public more about what they need. I'm not sure we've heard everything yet, so boy, that would be awful tough. I'm not saying it shouldn't be measured, but how do we put a number on that? I don't know. Just a question.
Thank you. Mr. Smith.
Not so much on the metrics, but what I see missing, I think Bruce touched on a little bit, but I wanted to bring some context to this, and I think we're talking about what the subcommittee, ad hoc subcommittee, is going to do to lay out a foundation of an agreement with our executive director for his goals to achieve. And I think certainly one of them needs to have a focus on leading and managing and employee development. So I know it's not here, but I hope that the ad hoc committee will focus on a listed goal and objective, that the executive director has a focus on the care and resourcing and the execution to fulfill the agency's mission and values, which are actually listed in 5, which is maximize greenhouse gas emissions reductions, reduce customer costs, and invest in local energy programs and projects. That's the mission. So we're focused on, this is a writing document that will emerge, but I think one of the goals that should be spelled out is how are the ways that the executive director will execute the mentoring, leading, managing, and resourcing of the employees and their interaction and their interface with the community. So I think that needs to be highlighted. Like any other public agency, we want our customers to have responsive, timely service focused to the mission. So I think that should be written in there somewhere.
Okay, good point, good point. Specify, Mr. McShane.
Yeah, I'm glad that Ed's here, because I know you do this for a living. And usually he charges $300 an hour. So,
well, based on the rate I'm hearing here, it might have to go up.
Right. Yeah, I think the idea of a subcommittee is not a bad one, Bruce, and I think the idea that we focus on the executive, right? That's what this is. It's not the organization. We set and are working on even enhancing our organizational goals, so it's important that we differentiate on those. I think to Mayor Delgado's point, metrics are good. I always used to say when I worked in the produce business, and God we trust, all others bring data. So where we can tie that in, just a suggestion, running a green organization, setting an example. I don't know how we tie that in, but I think that's one thing, and I definitely support the legislative component. I think we're going to be under attack continually, whether it be at the state or the federal level. So 3 to 5 goals is what I've always worked off of. So it's easy to accomplish and easy to evaluate. But other than that, I think we're on the right course.
Yes, Mr. Delgado.
Yeah, to give a couple of responses to Mr. Friend's questions. On number 3, a metric could be a date by which a comprehensive community outreach plan is complete, such as the other dates here that are used as metrics for documents. So that would be one piece of that. Number 5, a metric for maximizing greenhouse emission reductions could be a percentage that we're shooting for. If it's not met, there's always potential reasons why it's not met, but kind of knowing what we want as a metric to shoot for is important. Reducing customer cost by what percent? Investing in local energy programs and projects, using how much money? How many small or medium or large projects would we want to shoot for? So those are just, off the cuff. But there are always ways to translate goals into quantifiable metrics, and I don't think that 3 or 5 or the sub-items in 5 would be very difficult to come up with. Similar to 1 and 2, we might have thought, well, how are we going to have an opt-out rate? But we ended up with a 2% goal. And so I think we can do it even if we don't meet it. At least we know what our goals are in a quantitative way.
Excuse me.
I just
want to interject something that came to our attention.
Yes.
I just wanted to remind the board during its discussions that customer account information, including names, energy usage, opt-outs, is all confidential information and cannot be disclosed and could subject the agency to liability. So during the discussions, just to make sure everybody keeps that in mind.
Okay. Yeah, and I think some of these, like in number 5, those decisions of what if invest in local energy programs and projects, that's going to be our decision to make. And so it's hard to say what he should reach without us saying this is what we want. And there's going to be some serious give and take on what should be the priorities on that. I get it. So, but that's to come. But I think it's a very good point to be made that we are the ones in much of this that are going to have to set the standards that we want him to reach. Yes, Mr. Munzer?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is it your intention that this ad hoc committee formulates these goals, and then we end up voting on them at our next meeting, and then who ends up determining whether they're met? Is it the policy board? Is it the ad hoc committee? Is it the combined operation policy board? Who will then determine?
I think it'd be up to the policy board.
Okay, I just want that clarified, that so we all know that, you know, it's not going to be the goal of this ad hoc committee.
No,
to
no,
determine
no.
Whether
No,
the goals are being met.
we are the board, and we have that responsibility, I believe.
Thank you.
Does anybody disagree with that?
I don't disagree. I just feel that that's also how he's going to report back to us on his evaluation, so that it becomes part of public, but he knows what the to-do list looks that we've given him the assignment on that's been voted.
I have no problem with this list being created and being done by ad hoc. I just wanted to make sure we were all clear who was going to evaluate this list being met or not.
And if I don't know if anybody else would want to do this. This is a good committee to be on because it would end by July 1st, so it's not too bad. But we don't want to have this go on for years. We want to get set and get our goals and move on, and our measurements that we have. And I think we can feel of the 4 that I recommended, we have 3 that are present and the chief of staff of the other. And so I feel very strongly that they'll get the message of what the comments have been above and beyond my proposal or my suggestions, and I didn't expect these to just say, okay, you take those and let's go. So I appreciate your input. Yes, Mr. Frank.
And thank you for making it a short duration, but I want everybody to understand this type of committee is going to be needed yearly because the shifting political world and the shifting utility world is going to need to revisit our goals at least yearly. Whether we want to set Tom up to respond to them yearly, that's going to also have to be discussed. But this ad hoc committee, not the same committee, but a committee of that to review these is going to have to be done before the budget session, which would be in October. So I would say next summer there's going to have to be a same group of people come up and either renew the goals or change the goals or whatever, because the world's going to change and it may have to happen more than a year. I don't know. This is going to be an ongoing part of this policy board.
It's a very good point, and I think that you know, to get these drafted by September 1st, and my thought would be we need to go to September 1st of 2019 to see where we are, and I think we should do it annually. But I think September 1st would be a good date, reasonably. This is a tight timeline too. But I think that would be, so we get an annual review. Okay, how are we doing, and what's good, bad, or indifferent?
Well, there's no reason for us to all be together if we're not facing a timeline and getting something done, or we'll just kick the can down the road.
I agree. Wow. Any other comments from board members? Oh, Mr. Smith.
Just a reminder, what's the total agency employment group number? We're about 15?
30, I think, at build out.
30 at build out.
Total, I think is it 27, 30, something like that?
So I think in the first year, it's much thinner than that and leaner than that. And I think the use of board and operations subcommittees will become a function of what's needed.
Excuse me, I think there's just half a dozen positions that have not been filled or something.
When we are fully staffed, we will have 23 people.
23, excuse me.
23. So that's fully staffed. So for the first couple of years, I foresee that this is will be heavy on ad hoc committees, on personnel, on some of the operational help. An executive director with that few people is going to need some help. So I think you're right. I think you're right on target. I think that there will be a variety of other groups it may be. And that's, I think, the dialogue between the two chairs and the executive director ought to surface what are those things with the framework of what do you need, Tom, and how can the boards serve you, and what are the opportunities to develop the standing committees that will help support you until we are able to run. Right now we're walking, but we're going to need to be lean for quite a while. But I think that the dialogue with the executive director will flush some of those out.
Yeah, with you know, the startup mode, which is critical, and it just doesn't happen in a couple of months. This is going to be another, at least a year from now, long process, and maybe into September of next year, in fact. But that's historically, the startup framework is at least 2 years in an agency like this.
Right. I didn't want it to pass off of the list because it came based on what somebody else had said. There was I think you identified a need for legislative connection that we would want our executive director to have that listed there. I think also the local resources that we would expect that he will collaborate with, the Air Quality District and a variety of other things that are all working towards reduction of greenhouse gases, and the education and the delivery of program execution. It's not that this agency has to do all that delivery, but there will be some partnership opportunities with city, county, and other agencies that they can lessen their load on their employees but still fulfill the goal of the education and programs. So in the first couple of years, I see this as we're not trying to do everything. We're trying to capitalize on what's already being done by another agency down the road, that we can maybe make that program a little bit stronger because we have the money or we have the idea, but we don't have the manpower in the staff to execute. So I would see this as something that should be listed, that we expect that the executive director will look for opportunities to reach out to local.
And thank you. I think we're in great position because the way this is formed, and it wasn't, believe me, I already know it took a 5-year process to get 16 cities and 3 counties, but the Project Development Advisory Committee that we had, they just didn't have, let's do it and then figure out how we're going to do it. We went the other way. We said, let's see who would reach out to others and see how this can be best be done, and then this is the proposal we have. They did a phenomenal job, and I know each and every one of us appreciates the Project Development Advisory Committee. But this agency did it like no other that I know of in forming a CCA. And I think we're going to see the benefit in working in, like, with Monterey Bay Air Resources District and so forth. They're on board. They were part of, many of them were on part of the Project Development Advisory Committee. So very good point, and I think we're in a great position to get that input consistently from other agencies and leaders. Any other comments from the board? Comments from the public?
Robert Frischmuth from Communities for Sustainable Monterey County. Just one other kind of long-range executive goal I was thinking of, and this would have to do with collaboration with other CCAs. I think there's some real, could be some real future long-range benefits in doing certain kinds of collaborations with other CCAs. For instance, programs, if we had similar programs with other CCAs throughout the state, it could be much more effective statewide, as well as helping us. We have to have consistent programs going from CCA to CCA. Another area would be advocacy or legislation collaboration, focusing on Sacramento or PUC or whatever we have to do. There's a lot more power in collaboration, getting CCAs working together. And, you know, Tom's already done one on purchasing power, you know, which was, I think, is a good collaboration. Doing collaboration on things that, the economy of scale. So I think there's some metrics we could do with forming collaborations, you know, how many collaborations and where and how. Anyway, it's just another idea.
Yeah, thank you. I can assure you, other CCAs come to us at this infant stage that we're in, and Mr. Habashi in particular, to ask him his advice of how to implement some of these policies. And we are very much involved with the other CCAs. There's a California lobbying agencies. We have our own lobbyists as well. But believe me, a good point, and we think that is absolutely essential, and I particularly know that we need to have cooperative efforts in Sacramento. They help immensely.
Christy Markey again. Jane has offered to be on this committee. She'd be honored to do it, and I did take notes while everybody was speaking, and I think I just need clarification. Is there going to be an underlying evaluation document that kind of goes through the fundamentals that most evaluation documents go through? And these goals are kind of the highlight points, or is this the development of an evaluation document itself? I think I just need some clarity on that.
At this point, I'd like to get I think it's a development of it, but I think when we make the decision coming up, we're going to have to establish the criteria that we want to have him make, that we can measure as best we can. Is that the way everybody understands it? That's my thought.
Yeah, I see it that way too, and also a two-way expectation that he has to do that for his organization as well.
Correct.
But while he's formulating that for internally, he needs to work with the board to be able to develop his evaluation systems that we will do for him or on him.
Sure. That's understood. Very good.
Michael Sain again with CCL. This is more of a constructive criticism of the website a little bit, and specifically goes towards item number 1 on the ad hoc committee. To get that less than 2% customer opt-out, I think you need to review the question and answer area of that website. It's somewhat confusing. So what I did is I went and called that number that you give us to clarify these questions, or if you have another question that's not on there. And if you didn't know, this number at that time went to Michigan. I guess you'd hired a group to answer these questions or to clarify. May have been a mistake. There are no CCEs in Michigan. And nothing against the person that answered the phone, but not very much knowledge on what was going on. They were just set there to answer certain questions. So I asked a question about wholesale versus retail with solar. She thought retail was less than wholesale, was her understanding. And I asked her why she thought that. And in Michigan, they have retail stores. And so that's where they go to buy their cheaper products. So she had the issue reversed, and she said, I will give this to someone at MBCP back in California, and they'll follow up on it. No one followed up on that. And the first person I talked to, the reason I asked this, I do some solar advising, and a gentleman called me to answer the question. He couldn't get a hold of the number. It just rang, rang, and rang. I called, it rang quite a bit before I got an answer. And it was confusing to them. And the person was very honest on the other line. They actually said, we're just not that knowledgeable about these issues. So I think that needs to maybe be rectified. I did talk to Mark Adato about it at a transportation conference last month, and he said he would follow up. And the question, what was happening, I said, well, how are people responding to you not maybe having the answers? And they said, well, they would, prior to hang up, say, I'm just staying with PG&E. So I think that might be something you want to review and maybe call yourself and ask a question or two and see if you're satisfied with the answers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kevin Dayton, representing Clear Honest Options and Clean Energy. Regarding goals, first I liked the comment that was made earlier about collaboration with other community choice aggregation agencies. Perhaps being a little bit more imperialistic in my thinking, I'd also suggest that maybe a way to measure would be to look at first, how do you rank in terms of rates and activities with other agencies? So do an evaluation where you look at yourself competitively with the other agencies to see how you're doing. I remember a lot of talk when this agency was being talked about and you were getting local governments to join, saying, oh, this is going to be a state or even a national model for public policy agencies that do this. And if you're still serious about this, like was being told to the public at that time, compare yourself to Sonoma Clean Energy or Marin Clean Power. How are you doing? That would be a good metric to do. You should be the leader, and even though they formed before you, they should be saying, oh, this group is doing it better. Also consider expansion. I was excited a couple months ago when somebody said that representatives of this agency were talking to San Luis Obispo County people about expanding into there. And in addition to competing against others, you should consider if you want to expand into areas that aren't being served. Is that going to benefit you if you have more customers? Will you be able to have more negotiating power in the market for buying power? Something to look at here. Another thing about goals is one thing that hasn't been mentioned much is customers. And you do point out this is about the executive and not about the organization. But as you look at the survey that was conducted in November 2016 to customers, finding out what they liked about Monterey Bay Community Power and the concepts. And for example, the number one issue was most important thing for people is customers will have a chance to opt out of the new Monterey Bay Community Power if they want to continue to get their electricity from PG&E. And you're setting a goal of 2% opt out. And my thinking is, thinking from the customer point of view, maybe your goal should be how many of the people are aware that they have a choice of opting out. I think it's great that you have such a low opt-out rate for commercial customers, or only 76 opted out. I'm also a little skeptical that all those commercial customers actually weighed the two and decided to go with Monterey Bay Community Power. When I go and tell people about this group and what this agency is doing, there doesn't seem to be any awareness of it. So, it's one thing to get the 2% goal. The other one is to make sure that the customer is aware of their options. You're a public agency, and you have to be honest and transparent with people about what's going on. So keep the customers in mind as you make these goals and metrics. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Paul Gutierrez, and resident of Salinas, homeowner. And I was just coming in, and I was thinking of whether I should talk or not. A little emotional, and as far as my thoughts and being involved in this process for the last year and a half, and the talks that were discussed, the presentations that were given, the promises that were made, the concepts that were given, and then to see the CEO come in and talk about the lowest price possible, carbon, not talking about greenhouse gases, power from anywhere, and we don't know where it comes from until after we purchase it. All these things that we talk about now that are our discussions, and we talk about being history, I think we were sold something a lot different and a lot more impactful for our local community than the cheapest, the best. That's history. Sorry, we've had to rush for a year and a half. And I understand that we've gotten to a certain point, and it's fine that we are where we are now. And I think that some mistakes have been made, and a lot of engagement and a lot of messaging was made to push this agenda and not follow through with the CEO being in line with that same thought process. To hear a CEO saying that maybe the community advisory group might just be a pile of shit, or whether we buy the cheapest power and we're buying hydro of 400 megawatts, which I don't think there's even 400 megawatts in California, but there might be. The community wants local. The community wants a benefit for ourselves. The community wants to see people in our community benefit. And I don't know that many people that make $500,000 a year. And maybe in your area you guys might, but when we hear $500,000 compensation, it seems like a lot. And the community that I live in and know of, every dollar counts. And when we talk about going forward, we need to talk about what benefits our community and not just status quo and getting things off running, because it's been a year and a half. We've heard the exact same thing. We've been in a rush to get this far, and we're going to look back later. It's been a year and a half. Thank you.
Any other comments from the public? Okay, I'll bring it back to the board. Close the public session. I think that, as I said in my opening, I think that the opt-out rate of 2% is pretty strict. Probably should be something like 4.
I think our budget's 5.
Budget 5.
I think the budget's 5.
Yeah, in our budget we have 5. I was getting a little ambitious, I guess. So I don't know what the board thinks of that. If 5% would be acceptable, or again, this is a proposal to the ad hoc committee to come back to us for a final decision. So this isn't the final decision. Does 5% seem better than 2 in general to people?
This is merely a goal.
Yeah.
Okay, so,
Yeah.
Sorry, we don't need to fix it. Number one, because it's going to the ad hoc committee, and also it could be lower than we might think is what our budget is, and make that the goal for the executive director.
Okay, I'll just leave that up to the ad hoc committee. Have them come back to us.
Well,
with
and I think also going to the CEO with it is something like this realistic for us to go ahead and put together, and he might counter something out in terms of what's realistic that he can achieve for those goals, and if he thinks he can it too and wants to leave it there, I think that's where the conversation needs
I
to
just
take
want to
place.
make sure this is not a strict number.
Because of some of the suggestions about making sure we talk to the other groups in the state, I think we're going to be able to track what happened in Sonoma County, what happened in Inyo County, what happened in rural areas. That's what we need to concentrate on, not the city ones like Santa Clara. So I think we could probably put together some numbers that maybe 2% is acceptable. I don't know. But I think we could do the research and find out real quickly what the norm is.
And it might be beneficial too to find out what kind of strategic goals are placed at other CCAs with their CEOs, and see if we're in alignment with our bucket list of what we want from our CEO with other CCAs and what they're doing with their goals for their CEOs.
Well, the other question is, if we want to be number 1, do we want to accept somebody else's goals, or do we want to make sure that our committee, our community, wants to see a higher rate than anybody else does? There's been a lot of talk about the money. Maybe we should hold him up to the fire just to make sure the money is worth what we're paying him. I don't know. That's something we're going to have to look at.
Okay. To proceed, I mean, to go with my general suggestions, and others have been made, and people have heard them. The ad hoc committee will come up with those, and I think take them into account. Is there anything specific? I guess the motion maybe would like to see is to follow the proposal with consideration of additions that have been mentioned at the meeting.
So moved.
I'll second that motion.
Any other comments on that? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Carries unanimously. Yes.
I'm sorry, I missed who moved it? Oh, thank you.
Okay, we go to the item number 8, board member comments or reports since our last meeting. Are there any comments or reports? I think some have been made, but yes, Mr. McShane.
Well, just to the public and those that are enthusiastically following this, thank you for coming. Thank you for coming to these meetings. The public is our greatest asset. I think Tom shared at City Council last night as he presented to Salinas that the average utility ratepayer spends 10 minutes looking at their electricity bill the entire year. And the goal for me is to see to it that it's 20 or 30 minutes. People are thinking about where their power came from and benefiting from the programs that we put in place. So for any bit of impatience that's being experienced, work with us. Continue to work with us. I think that's it. Our CEO is doing everything he can to engage a robust advisory council and ultimately procure local, green, and sustainable energy. I mean, that's how we were set up, and I look forward to that. To each of the board members here, I hope that you're taking the time, if needed, to call on staff. I am talking with Mr. Hibashi regularly. I'm calling on staff regularly. And I know that with some of our boards, our cities, sometimes some of us have Cadillac service, briefings with donuts and coffee and can I get the door for you? Other cities, maybe not. There isn't a regular briefing. I think that goes hand in hand with being prepared for these meetings. So don't be afraid to pick up the phone. I think in particular, some of the discussion items today, I was not afraid to pick up the phone and engage the operations board members And I think to staff, it may help to resend out that contact information. And it may even help to have a reminder from Tom that, you know, we're all there to work with our board members and in preparation for the meeting if that's needed, by all means. I just want to compliment our team, our nimble team. Somewhere around here I have a copy of the ad that ran in the Herald. I think it was also in the Sentinel, you know, in commemoration to Earth Day. There was both good copy and a great ad. I really loved how it was put together. The machine behind what we're about is really turning on the marketing juice. And I don't know if everybody else is seeing what I'm seeing, but that's positive. In particular, the outreach. Monterey Bay Community Power was out the Ag Tech Summit. They were at Founders Day in Salinas. Just last night they were pitched on another event. So if there's a, yeah, up in Santa Cruz and good old days, it's really impressive how nimble and present that's happened. And I'll tell you, I've run into some grumpy people and escorted them right over to the booth to get the treatment from James or Mark or Liz, our new recruit. You know, I want to also point out, because the agricultural community makes up anywhere from 25 to 30% of our ultimate usage. My wife's in farming, and man, I'll tell you, you know, she's right in the thick of growers that have 200 plus hookups, pumps, and remote destinations that, you know, see this as a threat. And James did a remarkable job to get them all in one conference room at the grower shipper. And it was a real hot meeting. And in the end, boy, was it a real positive meeting. I know for a fact that James and Tom were able to really do a good job to handle tough questions. So I just want to recognize that. You know, we're in the middle of it, right? This is the middle. We should celebrate. We should get out. We should be talking to our neighbors. You know, I know there's a lot of differences and some, you know, chatter. We could discuss the carpet or this office or how hard it was to get here or how cold it is outside. But really, we're making a huge difference. And between now and July 30, when we have our 31st, the last day of residential opt-out, you know, it's up to each and every one of us to do our part to make sure that Monterey Bay Community Power succeeds. So I just thought I would share those positive things. That's all.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions? Kaufman Gomez.
It also might benefit to have all of the board members. I don't know how update the website is to make sure that you've identified all of the board members, because obviously as a board member we're a champion for the CCA here, and letting the public know in case our local agencies have questions on who that they can reach out to that are representing the agency.
I'm happy to have my email and cell phone up there.
Okay.
I'm not happy, but I will put it there.
Okay, any other comments from the board? All right, we will adjourn to our next policy board meeting on Wednesday, June 6th. This meeting is adjourned.